Kia ora koutou and welcome to the meeting this morning, to our Infrastructure Committee meeting. So we've got lots on our agenda and I'd like to open with the karakia. Ino tātou. Kia horo, te marino, kia whakapapa, pounamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou ia tātou katoa, huie tā kiwi. The translation is may peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, bind us all together. So with that, we will have our apologies and declarations of interest. We have two councillors who will be joining us more towards 10 AM, being Councillor Collard and Councillor Stratford. And we also have a deputation this morning, but that is running a few minutes late. So if I can just move.
One apologies from Ms. Worship.
Okay, so we've got one apology, so I'm happy to move. Do I second? Seconded, Councillor Smith. Thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
Unanimous. So following this with the deputations, and given that we will need to have potentially 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I'm happy to raise a few matters in terms of being the chair and announcements today. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Andy, our general manager, who's here, and also on a positive note to our new CEO, Blair, a chartered professional engineer, and I'm really looking forward to the approach with the new slogan, "Just Do It." It may have been taken from Nike, but I think it's really relevant, all about delivery, and I think it's good to have a new lens on things as well. And Andy, being an engineer himself, I'm sure he's not biased towards any approaches, but engineers and planners do work well closely together, and I'm liking having a different approach and a new lens on things with a focus on infrastructure, which I feel is very important and very pertinent to our committee today. With that, do you have anything you'd like to raise before we move on to the agenda items? Excellent. Well, we'll move on to report 5.1, considering that we'll need to come back to our deputations when they do arrive. And before that, we will move the minutes. So I'm happy to move the minutes, the prior minutes. That was Member Gardner. Are there any corrections or matters you'd like to raise about the minutes? No matters about that. All in favour? Aye. Aye, excellent.
Madam Chair, I'll abstain as I wasn't at the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Double note in the minutes. Thank you. So that brings us to item 5.1, the boat rent study. And I think online we may have Blair. I can't see the current people online. There he is in virtual land. Morena Blair, welcome, no mai, hi to mai.
Morning. Nice to see everyone together in a room for a change.
Yes, no, we're all here, but we can see you clearly and we can hear you. If you'd like, just like to speak up, and if with your permission, would Blair be able to speak to this item?
I'm happy for Blair to speak to this item. I will do a little introduction. So the programme study delivery plan is a step on from the programme study that was presented to Infrastructure Committee last year now. And clearly studies are important to put a framework together, but actually having the ability to implement the finding of those studies is critical as well. So this committee did ask for a delivery plan, and that's quite clearly a focus in terms of getting stuff done. Just do it. This is the result of that request. So with that sort of introduction, happy for Blair just to talk through the recommendation and the report. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. Chris, I'll just clarify, we sat on this for a little while, hold it back, just waiting to see what the TIF, the new TIF looked like, because obviously that's important in this space. So we got that decision late last year. So hence it would have been through a lot earlier if we didn't know what was happening. Key recommendations, the big one that's probably generates the most discussion is the strategic funding source to enable council to move quickly to purchase land that will support not just boat ramps but also other functions near the seaside. That's the key one. We might end up coming back to that one because I think that'll generate some discussion. In terms of the upgrades, Waipapa Landing car park, that has gone forward as a TIF round 6 application. So that's actually progressing. The other ones that have gone forward, Rangiputa, both projects in Rangiputa have also gone forward in round 6. So things have been moving in the background. Russell car park, the request there is to do some further scoping. That's a bit more challenging project, given the need to be quite specific now with our TIF applications and what we're going to do and timeframes. So that's requesting initially some support, operational support, 15 to 20, to actually develop that a bit further from an engineering perspective, and also acknowledging that there's a significant amount of consultation required there with iwi due to that site. Whatawhiwhi Reserve, that's been, the recommendation there was to include that in the reserves review. A quick update on that though too is that the Te Huku Community Board have set up a project to do like spatial planning around the reserves. So we have let Christine Hawthorne know, who's doing that there is discussions around that. So there's potentially get some professional support from her in that place. Ramp guides, that was initially put up for round 6, but because it was unbudgeted, it's been held back. We're just asking again to maybe forecast that in the budget. The main reason behind that is probably the only real physical safety recommendation that the boat ramp study came back with. So we just need to make sure that remains in the forefront. And then the floating jetties, that requires some support from Far North Holding to scope that a bit further. That's right in the neighbourhood of what they do. So just a small bit of support asked there, around 5,000 to help support the scoping for those. So I guess the key to what's come back through that is that there is some funding being requested to do some further scoping before we can get into physical works. And the key one for the elected members is that strategic funding source. I just wondered, if Andy, if you wanted to talk about that one a bit more, given its nature.
Through the chair, I think at the moment we'll probably just take questions on this. I think it's a significant sum. We do spend a lot of time, staff time, looking at purchases of land adjacent to boat ramps, and that would enable the funding to be put in place to enable us to do that. Elected members do need to bear in mind the various demands on funding for infrastructure, which boat ramps is one part. And clearly would need to balance the amenity and the amenity value of providing additional facilities for boat ramp parking alongside other infrastructure demands that we have around water and roading and district facilities. So it is largely a political debate around where you want to spend your dollars.
Thank you, Andy. I'm just mindful that we haven't moved or seconded this item as yet.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move A at this point.
A.
A only at this point. And to allow elected members to discuss B, C and D, and then we can vote on those if that's the way elected members go. Can I have a second?
Absolutely.
So we have one item on the table, being A. The matters B, C and D will be up for discussion, and I'd like to suspend standing orders in order to have a free and frank discussion because this isn't a small amount of money. And also I'm aware that we may have a number of questions for Leah and staff to answer in this respect. I'm happy to move to suspend.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Thank you. As a mover, would you like to commence the debate?
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I read this report, you're right, Leah, the thing that stuck out for me was D. Absolutely stuck out for me. So I dragged out my long-term plan, 36,945 soups in this district, and that worked out at $135 per soup. And I struggled with that. It's a lot of money. On the other side of the ledger, we do need to do this. There is so much income that comes into the Whānau from our connection to the sea and our ability for our tourists to get access into the sea and our residents to get into the sea. And it's hard for me to quantify that because there's no productivity report that is appended to this, so I can start to justify in my mind what's the sum total benefit, economic benefit for the Whānau by having the right sized infrastructure as opposed to asking the ratepayers to pay more and more and more. And then I got reflecting about how we do the $100 targeted rate for roads per soup. So I worked it out that if we went to a targeted rate rather than a general rate, and it doesn't actually say in here, it doesn't actually go into that level of detail, and it would be something that Janice and her team would need to work out. But if we actually went to introducing a targeted rate, so everybody was transparent on their rates full, and it was around providing maritime infrastructure, if it was aligned with the roading rate, which is $100 per soup, that's $3,694,500 per year. And we can't make those decisions today because obviously they need to go into the LTP and the annual plan for deliberation, but I would be quite comfortable if that was the way we took the conversation and we had that conversation with our ratepayers and said, is this an acceptable solution for you to pay? But I would want some more research to go with that, and that would be the research that quantifies the economic benefits that this kind of investment would return. So the D is the area I got stuck with. I'm actually totally happy with B and C. I think that's probably all I can add at this point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Do we have any finance staff here, or maybe Blair might be able to answer? With the Janice is online. Excellent. Thank you, Janice. We always have questions for Janice. $5 million loan funded as opposed to operationalised. How much would $5 million per year loan funded cost the ratepayer?
Through the chair, bearing in mind that land is a non-depreciating asset,
Yes.
interest costs would be upwards of around 150,000 a year.
150,000.
Madam Chair, if I might, elected members need to be mindful that we are going to reach our ceiling, our debt ceiling within the life of the long-term plan. So we would need to have a conversation about whether this organisation can continue to borrow or whether we're going to have to fund capital by targeted rates in advance and create a pool. And I'm not sure whether the Rating Act sits in the legalities and the niceties of that, which is why we need Janice to be part of this conversation.
The other thing I'd say through the chair is that the 5 million is an estimate to allow some of those discussions to happen when certain land blocks do become available, so that we know we have some budget for it. It is not an intent to spend 5 million every year on land, but every time property comes up, we then have to come back to council and we come back for unbudgeted expenditure. So this is just an attempt to try and have a placeholder in the plan that allows for that to happen without having to have these conversations all the time when land comes available.
Thank you, Jen. So we'll go with Councillor Vucic and then
I'm happy for you to go first.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, a bit like Deputy Mayor, it's D that I was concerned about, and $5 million for several reasons. And Janice, I have a few questions for you. $5 million does mean per annum is open-ended, so that could go on for what, 10 years, and you have a significant issue and a problem. And given that our highest risk is actually affordability and delivery of key infrastructure, I'm wondering whether this is a nice to have that we just simply cannot afford. But I do have some questions. So and also I don't quite buy the argument that you need to be able to move quickly, because we can set call a meeting, an emergency meeting within days, and we can actually do that at any time and get a whole of council around the table. There should be a property that comes up that is must have for some infrastructure. The question I've got is, as I said, it's a nice to have, it's a recreational activity, and given the time that we're actually facing, I do wonder whether it's prudent. So I'm going to actually ask, in terms of our debt ceiling, what would this look like as one thing, and if we do it, say, for 3 years, and secondly, what is the is this actually in the long-term plan and being budgeted for? Because as I understand, when you said it's unbudgeted, it's 5 million plus 5 million plus 5 million, all unbudgeted. So the argument to say, oh, if we call a meeting, it's still going to be an unbudgeted item anyway. So I take it is unbudgeted. So is it unbudgeted? So the first one is, what is our debt ceiling going to be like? Is this unbudgeted? If you can answer that, please, Janice.
Through the chair, it is not currently in the long-term plan. Obviously, when the boat ramp study came out, we did have some discussions around how we could try to future-proof any decisions around land for boat parking. We landed on a number of 5 million. That was an arbitrary number that we put forward. It could easily be 2 million. Again, it's really just to get a placeholder in there, and bearing in mind that the impact would only be on anything that was spent. If it wasn't used in any one year, it wouldn't impact on rates the following year.
You understand that? Just finishing off, Madam Chair. Yeah, I understand that. I'm still not comfortable with it, because this applies to everything that we actually do. Any piece of infrastructure, any bit of road that we may want to widen or extend, any nice to have boating infrastructure, all of these things go. And given we've got climate change, we've got sea level rise, we've got all of these things on our plate, and affordability issues, and an economy that we don't know where it's going. We have other mechanisms available to council. For example, we have the Acts of Parliament, the Public Works Act. If we really need a piece of land, we have methods that we put into practice to acquire land. So I don't see, and it concerns me, saying let's do a placeholder, let's put aside 5 million annually if we need it, that we can have it on sale. I'm sorry, but I can't see that argument. I have no problem with doing A, B and C, Madam Chair. They make sense to me, and it's certainly A, which is on the table, moving C. I think we do need that study, and doing that study, I think we should be looking at what really is our likely expenditure, what are our priorities, what is our future debt ceiling that we're likely to face, risks that we may be associated, given that there's all these changes that are actually happening, and then in through the annual plan or the long-term plan process, go through the process that we would normally go through. That's my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Usich. Andy has a response as well before we move on to Councillor Smith.
Through the chair, thank you. And just to help the conversation on a little, this has been, recommendation D has been put to you as a result of the program study. So this, we were asked to provide a delivery plan to deliver on the outcomes that were identified in the work that was done in the study, and clearly the placeholder for land is does assist in getting those outcomes. I do appreciate the concerns about cost and affordability, but certainly it was a recommendation coming out of the study that was endorsed by the Infrastructure Committee. So their team were right in putting that forward to you, but I do get the debate around whether you actually want to include that at this point or not. I'd also just point out that for the value of 5 million currently goes beyond the delegation of Infrastructure Committee. So any decision you make today for that number has to go full council, and you may want to here today consider whether you approve it going to council with an element of additional work before that paper comes. So just to help you out with it.
Thank you, Andy. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Andy. That's helpful. So just a question around A first, Blair. I note in the boat ramp study, there were a number of recommendations and options pegged to each individual asset. And so a couple of examples are on page 307, there was a recommendation to remove the Te Helmi boat ramp from the official list. And on page 292, there was a option to consider Opedo Bay parking expansion onto the remainder of the reserve. That second one especially, we know that there are more levers at play than simply just making a decision to do that. So I'm just looking for some comfort around how the remainder of those options and recommendations within the study are going to look to be implemented, and how other work streams in the organisation will be considered as part of that. And a good example for Opedo Bay is the development of reserve management plans in that space to actually look at what the best use of that space is before just making that decision. So just looking for some comfort around the delivery of those specific recommendations and options within the report. Do you want to answer that first?
Sure. And probably the clarify around options versus recommendations. So there's a multiple of options that haven't been recommended because of various reasons. So they're not necessarily all going to take place. So around that Opedo Bay one, yes, there is an option, but it's probably not a good one. So that was how those stand. So, and in terms of those other issues that are in that report that have been looked at, Far North Holdings and our asset management team work very closely together actually, so that they're constantly in discussions when FH&L pick up things that need development or incorrect and are scheduled. So I've got a very high level of confidence between the two organisations. There's constant movement in that space. If that helps.
Okay, thank you, Blair. That does help. Madam Chair, just in regards to B, C and D, I share the sentiments of my colleagues and the concerns of making amendments to budgets without looking at the impact of that budget. It's not unbudgeted expenditure, it's asking us to make changes to that annual plan outside of the process that we're going through over here in terms of agonising and making sure that that rating impact is as low as possible. So I'm really hesitant to support these without understanding what that big picture impact looks like. And to Andy's point about D going to council, I think that it would be, I'd be more comfortable if we were considering B and C at a council level in terms of the annual plan conversations as well. I'm not sure how $25,000 of OPEX will impact our rating within that conversation. I'm not sure how the capital expenditure will impact our rating, to Anne's point. outside of that process. So I just feel like there are two processes we're going through at the moment with our annual plan, and that doesn't make me feel comfortable. I would much rather look at the big picture, and I think that that could be considered as part of a recommendation to council or through our annual planning process. So I just wanted to raise my concerns there. Then in regards to D, in March this year, the Strategy and Policy Committee approved the development of a maritime bylaw, and part of that development was to investigate visa charges associated to that infrastructure, to Anne's point, to start offsetting some of those costs. So again, I think it would be really good for that to be considered, that $5 million to be considered alongside the development of that bylaw, so we can understand what those impacts look like. I note in the bylaw report, there's a new form of that bylaw due to be presented to committee in the third quarter of this year. And I recognise that that's too late for that annual plan, but I think going forward, it's really important that we consider those two pieces of work streams together. So really just make sure that we start connecting the dots. So just to reiterate, my concern is around the lack of big picture thinking with B, C and D. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Welcome, Councillor Stratford. And you'd like to join the debate. You're up next.
Apologies, I don't know who's, where everyone is at for or against, but I just want to state that I'm in support of A, B and C, but not D. So if we could please split the resolution,
yes,
that would be
we
wonderful.
just moved down.
Excellent, okay, thank you.
I'd like to have another say, Madam Chair, since we're in suspending order.
Oh, cool, I wasn't sure if we were.
Suspended orders.
Thank you. I'll just have a question first and foremost, and then we'll move on to Councillor Court. We have suspended standing orders, Councillor Stratford. Blair, just a question about the tourism infrastructure funding, looking at the funding options, all funding options available to our council. How is land purchase looked at in terms of the Tourism Infrastructure Fund? And then also, have we had a conversation with the Northland Regional Council with regard to these types of facilities, given that a lot of the facilities in Northland are used by external parties across all of Northland that tow their boats from Whangarei or from Auckland and really are coming under pressure, not just from locals? The affordability factor is always an issue. So how would you consider those conversations and the potential income streams?
Through the chair, firstly, TIF land purchases are out. They're clearly, unfortunately, outlined as not part of the fund. However, the development of the assets would fall within the funding structure. We did talk with NRC, provided a lot of the data and supported the boat ramp study. And yes, it is a mixture of local growth and visitor demand that is placing all the pressure. NRC would be a strong supporting partner in any processes that went forward. Would be my thoughts from our discussions with them. But in terms of how we could structure it to target alternate funding sources, I mean, the data's there. We can provide a fairly clear supporting argument that we're getting pressures from outside the region as much as we are from within. So there are options if there was a funding source that came through from central government. I hope that clarifies a bit more what you're after.
Thank you, Blair. Those are my only two questions. Councillor Court has matters she'd like to raise, and I'd just like to welcome Councillor Collard. We're on item 5.1, and we've suspended standing orders for the boat ramp study. And we have moved A, and B, C and D are currently being debated. Thank you, Councillor Court.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I listen to my colleagues, and I'd like to raise in there that there's a danger of council commissioning reports and then not following through. And I have seen that so many times in my career as an elected member, and the one that still rankles to this day is the Kirikiri Waipapa Structure Plan. We cannot send signals to the community that we're going to meaningfully engage with them in developing strategies and then not fund them. And that may not be funded in whole. that might be funded in baby bites, or it might be an advocacy role for things such as tourism infrastructure or regional council. I'm also mindful that $5 million is a powerful amount of money at this point in time when affordability is, as my councillor colleague points out, our significant affordability risk. Significant risk, number one risk in the organisation. I'm also mindful that we don't know what the public thinks about this. So I don't want to see this kicked for touch. It's really, really important that this recommendation proceed in part to at least council. There's only 5 councillors in the room and our lovely Adele from the community board. But I do think this needs to go forward to full council through the debate. And I'd be much more comfortable if D's recommend that council consider the matter of $5 million be approved for strategic property purchases, but it would cover some riders. What's missing? An options paper from Janice on how this could be funded, and that's a lot of work for Janice, but we do need that options paper because it might not be just a $5 million capital, might be a targeted rate, might be any number of fees and charges. I don't know how the money could be collected in totality. I need someone whose job it is to give me the options so I can consider them. I also think it needs an economic impact statement because this is just not, as I said earlier, it's not just about providing access to the coast. And for completeness, I'd be the last person you'd be seen on a boat. But I do recognise that it's important to people of the far north. It's important to our economy. It's important for our tourism. So I don't want us to get gun shy here and kick it for touch. I'd just like to change the wording of D and say let's take this forward for a bit more of a forensic examination. We've got time. Let's do the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Court. I haven't had any questions from Member Garner. Councillor Collard, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I probably endorse what Deputy Mayor Cordes said. My biggest concern that I have is we're constantly saying where does the money come from in this current climate. Perhaps this has been discussed prior to me coming in, but it still is a question, and the economic impact statement is something that probably, or report is something that we need to see, but I am concerned about where the money comes from in our current climate.
Councillor, I feel that, we've got Member Garner.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I've listened to all my colleagues as well, and I would like to support A, B and C and have the D come back to Council as per Councillor Court's option. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And Andy has just provided a comment as well that he feels that staff would be comfortable with that approach as well. I'll now move to reinstate senior orders. I'm happy to move.
Happy to second.
Councillor Stratford. Thank you. So at the moment we have A on the table, which has been moved and seconded. In terms of the approaches B, C and D, we haven't moved D, so we can move the wording that is verbalised.
I'm happy to move. Do you wish to put A first, Madam Chair?
I believe that's already been moved and seconded.
Do you wish to put A?
We can put that to the vote. All in favour of A, which has been moved and seconded, aye. Any against?
I will move B and C as written, and in regards to D, I will move recommend that Council consider the matter of $5 million annually be approved for strategic property purchases related to maritime infrastructure to be included in the capital program commencing 2022-2023, and that an options paper on funding be prepared and an economic impact statement accompany the options paper.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll just pause there.
Typing furiously up there, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, financial impact statement.
Financial impact. Hey, financial.
especially the debt ceiling.
Thank you. We'll just bring D up onto the screen, just so we can all have clarity about the wording.
I just need to change that, Dolly, because Councillor Vesich has recommended a financial impact statement, and that's not what I said. And I'm happy for that to be amended in the debate, but mine is an economic impact statement, which is a different beast altogether. So that considers our struggling tourism sector. I would anticipate that the options paper on funding would include the financial impact statement on rates.
So can we put it, and that's what I was intending, can we put it into that line? So the option funding one include the detail of the financial impact to be really considering the risks that we may be facing.
Point of order, this is my resolution.
Oh, I was just trying to make it easier.
Thank you, Councillor Bussett. Councillor Court, can I just have clarity, the words after economic impact statement?
I can't read that.
If we keep it more generic, should we delete the words that are highlighted?
Yes, take that out.
Take that out.
Through the chair, could I please make a comment before you vote on this?
Thank you, Janice. No, are you happy to make comment?
Looking at how this resolution is currently sitting and requesting an options paper on funding and economic impact, that won't be done before the 19th of May council meeting. The next council meeting after that is the one to adopt the annual plan. So that will make it difficult to put this into 22-23.
Yes.
So maybe it is from 23-24 and it's part of the following annual plan and we don't have a budget next year. I just wanted to point that out because we would have to have had it included prior to that meeting because we have to do the necessary resolutions at that meeting.
Based on that, I'm happy to amend the years.
Push it out 1 year.
And that will give us time to consult with our community, which is going to be a critical part of this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to
Second
second that.
Thank you. So we've had it
Now.
moved and seconded. So we have
Amending the years, Madam Chair? Yes.
yes, 23, 24. Thank you. And Councillor Stratford would like to speak to the motion.
Yes, so I was going to vote against it if it was the current, going into the current financial year, because I could, even though we don't have it in front of us, I could see the financial impact and it wasn't going to go down well. But I'm happy to support 23-24 because it gives us time to decide what won't get done instead of the boat ramps, really. And consult, perhaps people do want us to keep putting their rates up, who knows? Kia ora.
Are there any other comments on the current motion, matters relating to B, C and D?
Yeah, I do. Look, the key bit of information there, which is not really covered there, I think the economic impact one will take some time. That's where the biggest work does, and there'll be a cost associated with that, which we haven't talked about, especially with the outside consultant coming along. But I think the key one for us is our risk that we're facing financially and what impact it's going to have on affordability. So that's what I would like to see included in there when Janice comes back. And I would see that as being something, Janice, that you could do internally. It's a simple matter to look at what our debt ceiling is going to look at and what risks we may be facing, given that we basically have renewals. This you all know, obviously we have renewals that are going to be there. There are things that we're actually going to be committing to, and some of those things coming up will have a significant impact on us, like our bridge renewals, our footpath renewals and so on. So I'm really concerned about what it may mean for us financially. So that's when I'm saying financial impact, not only is where the source of the money is coming from, how it's being funded, potentially also how we can raise funds. It would be great if we can raise even just the interest from the users of the program, given that it is actually a nice to have thing. Sure that there are some people that come in from Monterey and possibly as far as Fields Auckland dragging their boats and spend money when they're here. That can be calculated in the other. So that's my comment. So I'd like to see that detail coming through. Or I'll be raising all these issues again at the next debate. Thank you.
Councillor Beveridge. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm comfortable to support the deferral of the year in D, noting that that still doesn't prevent Council from considering unbudgeted or reprioritisation funding in the same manner that we have already been doing. So I don't think it shoots us in the foot, but it also gives us platform to really do the mahi. So I'm really comfortable to support D. Janice, are you able to confirm for me the figures in B and C, are they currently in the draft annual plan as it stands? That will help me decide whether or not to support those.
Through the chair, no, they're not.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you, Blair. So we have the motion moved and seconded. Now proceed to the vote. Can I ask all those in favour to raise their hands? Against?
Like to abstain.
Thank you. So that brings item 5.1 to a close, and we can now backtrack to our deputations. And we have the NTA here. I don't think they've lowered the speed limits yet, but you got here just in time. I would hate to think how much longer it would take you if those speed limit changes are made. So welcome to the NTA, Bernard, and to Andy Brown as well. You may have come some distance, so I can empathise with that. Welcome this morning.
Just a point of order before they begin, Madam Chair. The agenda says no deputation, so I'm not sure what they're talking to. Can we have a subject?
This is an update from the NTA. It was a late deputation for the agenda that was put out. However, we always welcome the NTA and we love hearing about roading, probably particularly Councillor Court, one of her passions. Would you like to say anything for the NTA before they begin their presentation?
So the Chair, I think the NTA are big enough to hold their own in this environment. So Bernard and Andy, and I know Calvin potentially will be joining us a little bit later. He's been held up, but certainly the conversation for today is around the unsealed road network, and in particular the work that the NTA have been doing through developing a centre of excellence nationally for unsealed roads. So a real credit to these guys. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. Yes, apologies for our late arrival. For those I haven't met, or we haven't met rather, I'm Bernard Peterson. I'm the Maintenance and Operations Manager for the Northern Transportation Alliance. And joining me today, we've got Andy Brown, Senior Asset Engineer for the Northern Transportation Alliance. And I have the absolute pleasure in introducing to you our Unsealed Road Centre of Excellence developed through the NTA. To begin with, I'm going to give you a little bit of the history, what's led to today. Back in 2015, Kaipara District Council had just come out of a period of having commissioner control in place, back to elected member. What happened during that period? I think it's been pretty obvious. Those commissioners, they came in with a purpose to claw back some of the debt, and in doing so, one of the things they looked at was pulling local share from some of our funding categories, including our unsealed road network. What that did was it left our network in an absolutely dire state. We had a bit of work to do. Coming back into an elected council, the budgets didn't increase. They went back to the level they were prior to the commissioner control, but they didn't increase. So we had to try and catch up, get our network back into a good condition with a very tight, restricted budget. So what we did was in 2015, the then rating manager, Henry Van Zyl, myself as a representative of Broad Spectrum at the time, or Transport Services rather, and my colleagues, we went through the process of doing a bit of a research review. We looked at what research had been done both nationally and internationally around the unsealed road space. And we landed on one in particular of interest, which was a research taken by Dr. Paige Green out of South Africa that resonated with where we were, what we were trying to achieve. So in 2016, with that in mind, the Kaipara District Council started their own blended aggregate trials off the back of the research we'd read from Dr. Paige Green. Looking at our material specifications, how we can better apply a product more suited to our unsealed network. Now, at the time, and this is rather embarrassing, but it's still the case across a large chunk of New Zealand, we were using a material specification on unsealed roads that was directly, immediately the same as what we put down on a sealed road rehab. Perfectly suited to a sealed pavement build, not at all suited to an unsealed network. Right, the material was very hard, blue, lacking in fines. We were putting it down on our roads. It was unravelling, it was corrugating. We were losing it to the water tables. We were getting tyre puncture complaints. Big issues there. So through our trials, what we did was we set up controlled trials. So we undertook conventional unsealed rehabilitation work alongside some blended materials in different quantities from different quarry sources over multiple sites with similar attributes. And we monitored those sites. We monitored them very carefully. We had point cloud GPS survey. We had visual drive overs. We had very early involvement with the Far North District Council being involved and showing an interest in coming out and having a look and giving us their feedback as well. And what it led to was, we had some of our trials that absolutely failed miserably. But we had a couple of other sites which 2 years of monitoring and we hadn't needed to put the grader over it once. Bound really nicely together. We had lime truck quarry activity on the road at the same time, held up really, really well, weathering in the winter, during the dry summer period, weren't unravelling. And through that, we started to narrow down a specification that was better suited to our unsealed network here in Northland. In 2017, we went through the process of having a look at our road maintenance and renewals contracts for Northland. The NTA was down at that stage. And through that process, the 2018 contracts were adopted with that new material specification included. Within that contract, we also included the Paige Green chart and details around the Paige Green. Now, we purposely left that envelope open and wide. We didn't want to constrain that specification. That's what we had before with the old specs, but it was more to encourage the local quarry sources and local contractors and to undertake their own trials as well, understand their material sources and how it would, best play out on their road networks. In 2019, through the NTA, we started the development of our Unsealed Centre of Excellence off the back of those trials, and Andy's going to talk to that shortly. 2020, we were very fortunate in receiving a PGF IOG fund of 8.06 million for our network. That's enabled us to roll out the Unsealed Centre of Excellence on the Kaipara network over 126 thereabouts kilometres of the network. And that's been continuing and will continue through to the end of June. But the whole Centre of Excellence will then be picked up as part of our business as usual under our existing funding. I'll just quickly go through the methodology for our construction work and why it differs to some of the old practices. I mentioned at the last Infrastructure Committee meeting, I hate that heavy metaling term that we throw around. Heavy metaling is a very old approach to going into a road, pouring on a set overlay of material and walking away and expecting it to last. Heavy metaling still has its place, but we tend to reserve that for those urgent needs to get something done quick while we go through the rest of the process of understanding the road. I prefer the term unsealed rehabilitation, and I want that to sort of fix in your minds. Unsealed rehabilitation, that's the conversation I'm having with my team, that's the conversation I'm having with the contractors, that's the conversation I'm having with the community. Far North District Council, 65% of your network is unsealed. That's significant. It's got significance to your ratepayers, to communities, backbone of a good chunk of your economy up there. So why should we look at our unsealed network any different to how we look at our sealed network? Right, when we approach a sealed pavement, we look at its renewal cycles and its reseal cycles. We're doing very similar with the unsealed network. The first thing we do is we understand the road, the use, what we've actually got there on the ground already. A little photo there, that's ground penetrated radar being undertaken on the Kaipara network. We have a more conventional approach of undertaking test pits and scalers. But the idea with that is we're actually understanding what that pavement is beforehand. We understand we've got forestry activities, communities, dairy, etc. This is another important piece of the puzzle. Without that, how do we know what that road actually needs as far as its rehab pavement? Associated works. The same approach for our sealed network. Why go in for significant, I think 2.9 million per annum up here on our unsealed rehabs without actually getting the groundwork sorted first? It's drainage, drainage, drainage. It's a key message. Often, we'd be mistaken for ignoring that a lot of the time, with what we see up there. But it's critical, it's the 101 of civil engineering. We go in, before we commence the pavement works, we clear out the water tables, and I'm talking a good deep cut, or a cut that's actually going to enable the grader to maintain that water table in the future. We go and look at the culvert assets, what's needing to be renewed now. Let's not wait 2 years after the pavement and rip it up and put a culvert in. So we get our culvert sorted, we look at our vegetation, and we take a full boundary to boundary approach. Vegetation, what we're looking for is those trees that kind of shroud the road and keep it damp during the winter and try and get daylight in. Pavement construction, we're not just tipping material on the road, expecting the log trucks to roll it in. We've actually got a roller and a water cart, and we're compacting that pavement in layers. You may note with the picture there, the material is a lot browner than you're probably used to. The reason for that is it's that high clay fines content. This comes out of the Page Green research. A higher plasticity index, the more that material is actually going to lock in on the road and prevent that unravelling. If we just jump on to the next one. Example there of the finished pavement. You'll see in the photo to the right, you've got that almost mosaic look to the material. Perfect gap grading between your larger material and your fines. That material, that surface there is locked in. It's like a concrete pavement when you walk on it. We do get a little bit of slurry during the winter months, but generally what we find the first couple of rains washes that off. That's just the fines releasing from the surface. And it ends up looking like the photo on the right. You may also notice the crossfall is a lot steeper than you're probably used to seeing. A seal pavement is around 3%. We look to design and build to 4 to 8%, and increasing supers for corners. The reason for that is the greater that crossfall, the quicker we can shed the water off the pavement and keep that surface maintained. Little quote there. We're getting a lot of positive feedback on this. This one comes from His Worship Mayor Smith from Kaipara District Council. In my 50 years of life on these Kaipara roads, I've never seen anything like what I was riding a push bike on Papaross Station Road. It's absolutely extraordinary. That's one bit of positive feedback we've received. We've also received lots from our local high complainants, if you like, which is fantastic. What we've done is we've actually brought them on the journey with us as well through the development of this. So it's nice to have that feedback, but we're also getting unprompted feedback from the community too, which is great. Right, and finally from me, alignment. So through the NTA, as I mentioned, this started out as a trial. We've got work to be done in Far North and Whangarei. Part of that process is the alignment. It's the alignment with the staff, it's the alignment with the contractors, it's understanding the materials. It means we've got a workshop on occasions, but it's not just a change in approach. The issue is we've got a change in institutional knowledge and experience. It's interesting because some of the practices I've just talked about, that was the standard approach many years ago. For whatever reason, budget constraints, reactiveness, we've gone away from that. And unfortunately, a lot of our contractor staff now, what they're used to is the pour in place, the reactive side of the maintenance. So this part here is a very important note, that's why I've included it. I'm now going to hand over. We're a bit like a car dealership here, so hopefully I've sold you on the vehicle. Andy's going to go through the warranty and servicing requirements.
I'm glad you didn't say good cop, bad cop.
And he's going to take you through what is the COE a little bit further and how that plays out.
Sure. So Bernie went through a brief history of what happened, the timeline of things. I guess the only other piece of the puzzle was as a part of the approval for KDC's PGF money, that was Waka Kotahi's buy-in was sought, and Martin Taylor, who's our investment partner at Waka Kotahi, basically said to me, for me to support this, you've got 3,500 k's of unsealed roads in Northland, you need to develop something, a centre of excellence that looks after the whole of Northland that can then be transposed into the other regions of the country as well. So what we did was started to use centre of excellence best practice and document and build on what the previous teams had done before I joined KDC, which was to create a model so we could understand the network, improve the design practice, utilise asset management best practice that we kind of have been on a journey with the NZTA or Waka Kotahi through the Road Efficiency Group program, bring back into the fray, as Bernard showed with the pictures, the best practice construction and document that, and also understanding what works for Northland. What suits our local conditions, because that's the key to it, is you can have all of the science behind it, but if you haven't looked at what works locally, then it makes it very difficult to make the improvements on the ground. So we use all that methodology that we're documenting in the COE through the NTA as a team, so all three councils. The strategy and planning team lead the development of the forward works programs annually, 3-year look-aheads, 10-year look-aheads for purposes of funding and whatnot, and then delivery through the maintenance contracts. Yep. So what we've done is created a maintenance management plan, or an MMP. Basically, it documents everything from start to finish. So if I decide I've had enough of working in the roading industry and want to go fishing for the rest of my life and whatever, that someone else can pick that up and continue on the good work and not fall back into the dark space that we've been for the last 20 plus years. It starts with everything from concept to completion. It's a living document, so if new science becomes available, we can look to utilise that science and pull that into what we do. And it uses everything from the wider industry. One of the things that came about over this journey of the COE is what NZTA and Waka Kotahi are now on, which is what they're calling differentiated levels of service. And they're going to be looking at that for our next NLTP period, which is the 24-27 period. What level of service is needed? So therefore, what level of investment is needed, given when you look at a road from a One Network framework perspective, the demand that's placed on it. So what is all the things that go on that make that road more or less important than the road across the other side of the country? So as part of that, we looked at, when we evaluated the model of the unsealed network in Northland, where does the demand sit versus where doesn't the demand sit? And one of the things we found is that the lack of drainage was because the carriageways had crept way out into the drainage channels, so therefore there were no drainage channels. So we're maintaining roads at 8-9 metres wide when we've got less than 50 vehicles a day on it. So that chart that you see there is my rationalisation of those levels of service. So level of service 1 is the lowest demand, less than 100, generally less than 50 vehicles a day on them, right through to our primary collector heavy service roads that have got all of our freight trucks running on them. And there's no reason that those roads need to be sealed, but they need to be the appropriate level of service to make those businesses, I guess, efficient, so the R&M and things like that are kept at a lower cost. Yep. What the model told us about all of that stuff was that 65% of Northland's unsealed network, there or thereabouts, has no traffic on it. And the other 35% has varying levels of demand. So we were able to break that down and keep that consistent across Northland using good best practice asset management to develop a forward works program that, I guess, our money's not going to get any bigger. We're not going to get a hell of a lot more money over the next 10 years from anywhere because there's so much pressure on everything from everywhere. So what's the best use of that money that we've got? How can we best spread that across the network and get the right outcomes for the people that use those bits and pieces of road? And that's with a bit of risk management as well. So those roads that have got 50 or less vehicles a day on, in fact, some of them have got 10 vehicles a day when you look at the traffic estimations, and they're quite justified because there's no houses on a lot of them. There might be a farm right at the end of somewhere. The risk management is really low. There is almost low to no risk to council to go and trim these roads back to what they should be. But if we don't do it, then they're going to just keep hemorrhaging money, basically. Yep. So from that model, we developed a forward works program. We're currently, so we've put that into play with the PGF money and KDC. And now with the other two councils, we're in the process of doing the desktop validation. So we're just going back through the information, making sure the data lines up, making sure there's nothing we've missed for year 1, year 2, year 3. And that's sort of like an iterative process like we do with the sealed roads here. Once we've got where we feel comfortable with the desktop program, then we go out into the field and go and look at those high level of service use roads and say, right, well, what do we need? You know, what does this road need to make it? Is it a full rehab, or is it just a rip and remake with a bit of top up material and then topping with page green? And then once we get that all agreed and confirmed, then we go into detailed design and we go and use the Austroads manual and the ARRB manuals, which set out how to do pavement design. The design following those guidelines basically looks at how strong is the ground versus how much material do you need on top of that to make it strong enough to accommodate the traffic. And as part of the Centre of Excellence, we started off with spreadsheets and bits of paper and manually doing it, and then over the last 18 months we've managed to pull all that in-house, utilising the Excel sheets we've got and automate the whole process. So basically you key in a road ID, a road number, and it comes up and it tells you all the information about that road automatically. The contractor inputs the pavement strength from the test pitting, and that gives us an outcome that says you need to build a road that's this, and it drills right down into how many truck and trailers of material should be being placed on that road. What the benefit with that is we get a confirmed and agreed intervention, so we don't get the contractors running off doing something else that's not got our risk management, asset management hat over it, lens over it, and we get an agreed cost. And then all of that information then gets saved in RAM for future reference. If someone wants to know what was done to that road 20 years ago, you go into RAM and there it is. The construction methodology, as Bernard pointed out, we've changed it up a bit. Austroads hasn't really been updated lately. I think it's about mid-2000s that the last update to Austroads was done, but the ARRB manual, which is generally what Austroads follows, had a re-release in 2020, February 2020, and it really heavily talks about crossfall and drainage and page green, tightly bound wear and coarse material compliance with that. So we make sure that that information is basically kept in our maintenance contract to make sure that we're doing the right thing on the ground.
Right.
So that's me.
Just before we close off, I just got to touch on a couple of extra opportunities and benefits we're actually seeing in Kuiper through this process. We've seen a cut down on cartage costs. Reason for that is we've actually been able to open up quarry sources that had their gates shut many years ago. We've actually established new quarries, and we've got to keep in mind here, you know, our quarry sources we're using today, they're not renewable. You know, they've got a time limit on them. And the ability for us to actually open up new quarry sources is getting harder and harder as we get that, you know, residential growth in the community. So. And of course, the most important one being the extended life out of the pavement. You know, by following these principles and putting the right product down, we're actually extending that pavement life. We're not having to intervene with maintenance as quickly. As I pointed out on some of our trial sites, you know, we went 2 years before they saw a grader, and that's consistently being seen now. We've rolled that out through the Kuiper. Cool, that's us.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Love that. Drainage. Yep. I got a few smiles my way. So I'm sure there's a number of questions here. I'll just note that we will be having a break at 11 o'clock to have a coffee. So I'm pretty sure every person will probably have a comment or question on this, and we don't get you here very often. So I'll start off with Councillor Busich.
Yeah,
Yep, fine.
You just made my day. For several reasons. One is I was there at the beginning, I spoke to Henry, really great engineer, thinking outside the square because of the financial constraints on him.
Yep.
And wanted to really be a part of that, to see you here today with the Centre of Excellence and to see the mix is absolutely brilliant. And everything you said about road building, water, and the slope, goodness me, I did that on my farm tracks. You're right about So, but I do have some questions. But just as I said, I'm really grateful to see that, and we need to be part of that Centre of Excellence to get things done up here and save those costs. So the question is, looking at that pavement, because one of the things that we do raise is dust. And so can you just describe with that, say that better one that you had there, what effect it has on dust? And number two, the mixture you have in the quarries, which you did sort of mention, I take it we aren't short of, there's no secret quarry that you've got that can only supply this. Is there others somewhere else? That's certainly fair here. And final question, and I'm putting them out there, was the width. When I was looking at 5 metres in a truck with its mirrors and logs, 2.5 metres wide. 5 metres means you've got to go over the edge. So on a lot of roads, if you can just comment on that width as you find out. That's it. So the dust, the mix, and the width.
Right, through the chair, I'll answer the first couple of questions, and then I'll hand it over to Andy for the third. Dust, we've got to be a little bit cautious in how we talk about dust with this approach. Visually, we are seeing a reduction in dust. At this stage, though, we don't have the PM10 monitoring to support that. That'll be part of our next step this summer. But yes, we are seeing that visual reduction in dust. Obviously, over time, as that pavement starts to wear and comes due its next renewal cycle or intervention point, the dust does increase. But yeah, for a new pavement down, massive difference. Right, I don't want to oversell that until we've got the scientists, the science to prove it. But, yeah. The other one was the material source. We do have quarry sources outperforming other quarry sources, but part of the process was we actually looked at taking, 60% from there, 40% from there. So we're actually using multiple sources in some cases, blending on site to achieve the materials spec as we see at best performing, and that's something we will encourage up here as well. It does mean we've got to try, get the quarries sort of talking to one another, talking with the contractors a little bit more. It's generally pretty easy to achieve these specs. It's just a case of taking a bit of the overburden and quarry run and mixing it in with your gap graded material and the like. So again, I touched on it before. Unfortunately, a lot of our quarry operators nowadays have kind of lost that experience. So it is going to, it does take a little bit of work. We've got to work with them, and that's why the best approach is let's get it out there. Let's trial. If we need to introduce a little bit more of that, we will. We'll trial the sources and find the best performing for our network. Yeah.
I guess also on dust, the maintenance intervention strategy that we like to try and work towards is that the first and foremost we should be getting the wearing course down as compliant to the contract spec, which is the page green, which is that well-bound top 100mm layer. Secondly, evaluate the situation once that material's down. Is there still a dust issue with residents living close to the road? Well, if there is, then we can intervene with dust suppression as a short-term solution, which allows us to mitigate the health concerns that the residents have while we investigate whether or not a road should be stacking up for road sealing and subsidy from Wakakatai, which is very few and far between, unfortunately. But if we take that approach, then we get a better all-round outcome long term. I'm trying not to go too technical because I could speak for hours on this. With respect to the material itself, conforming M4 metal, which is what they build the highways out of in New Zealand, isn't a naturally occurring source. You can't just go to a quarry and haul that out and crush it and away you go. They actually manufacture that. They put it through different sieves and they extract out the various properties and then they reblend that. The wearing course that we're proposing, are using within our maintenance contracts, the quarries that are non-compliant need to get on board with manufacture of material. They need to start figuring out ways, if they want to be part of having some of council's cake and being utilised by the contractors through the contracts, then they need to lift their game and go, right, well, this is the spec they've told us. How do we make it? What do we do? Do we bring in clay? Do we bring in sand? What's the recipe to make the right gravel so that Ventia and Fulton Hogan will come and purchase material from us and keep us as a viable financial entity? And from an NTA's perspective, we're happy to work with them to go on that journey to improve that process. Unfortunately, so far to date, not many of them have come and approached us yet. With respect to road width, so most of the forestry roads that we see in Northland are 6 to 8 metres wide. So passing trucks at higher traffic volumes isn't really an issue. The ones that we classify level of service 2 forestry are the ones where you might get 1 or 2 forestry trucks an hour. My personal opinion is council's not in the business of managing the risk for a commercial entity. That's their responsibility, and a lot of our logging trucks company, a lot of our forestry companies in Northland already do that. They impose statutory speed limits on their drivers outside of the speed limits that are posted on the roads. They have the 1K markers that they denote across the length of a road, and they continual radio contact between the office and the truck drivers to manage the passing of those vehicles. So, as I say, that the risk for those roads that fit into that level of service 2 forestry, the volume of traffic is very, very low, and the risk is very minimal, which is why I think it's acceptable to pull these roads into that 5 metre carriageway width. So we're just talking about the cross-full formation. We're not talking about the shoulder and the swale and all the other bits on the sides of it.
Thank you, Andy. We did have a question from Councillor Stratford, however, I'm not sure if it's being answered.
I'm just thinking about time, Madam Chair, and our agenda. I'm happy to leave it to ask after.
Thank you. Councillor Court, I'm not sure if you have any response. I know you're very passionate in this area. We do have a lot to get through. I had 3 matters I just wanted to raise, and also Councillor Smith. So the 3 things are, how long will it take you to model and map the far north, or is that the amount of work that you've already done?
It's done.
So that's done as part of that scope?
Yep, done.
Huge, big tick right there, A.
We're actually validating your network now.
Excellent. So further to that, since you've already done that work, our council has now moved towards 3-year funding cycles in order to have a forward work program and build capacity within the private sector for delivery. Do you have some numbers soon that you'd like to present, and the priorities of the roads for the rehabilitation, we won't use the word heavy meddling, for the rehabilitation of our unsealed roading network and our forward financial planning?
Slide 12 is the baseline to begin with.
Sorry?
Slide 12, that's your numbers on slide 12.
Excellent.
There's no money on that yet, but that's the theoretical numbers that we should be looking at achieving annually.
Excellent. So you'll be coming to the council to present this to the council, so we're aware of slide 12 and the numbers, and Janice with the numbers, and Kushla with the numbers. Excellent. So further with the numbers, I'm not sure if Blair's still on there. Tourism infrastructure funding. We have a lot of high volume tourism roads that in the past we've used tourism infrastructure funding for sealing. In my view, based on your presentation today, we could utilise that fund in order to rehabilitate that road and provide a higher level of service to accommodate the peak summer season. Have you had that conversation with Blair?
Oh, yeah.
May I encourage that?
Not a problem.
And lastly, about the regional policy statement for the identification and the protection of quarries. We're currently doing a district plan review. We're identifying our quarries. It was previously called the mineral zone, but I understand we've got a different name for that. Under the regional policy statement, that has a higher level of statutory protection for quarries, given its finite availability and reverse sensitivity issues from residential activity. Have you identified the quarries across the far north to work in with the new district plan in order to secure those quarries and therefore the material for our new roading program?
A little bit more work needs to be done on it. We're aware of the quarry sources we're using now and can provide that. But as I pointed out, there's opportunity there to actually open older sites that maybe only supply local farmers and the like. So we need to get the word out there and we need that kind of information feedback and understand what those opportunities are before we can give a full list. Yep.
just letting you know, you might need to have a conversation with Darren because our district plan notification is imminent.
Okay.
And there are rules for council as well associated with quarrying, namely if you're having more than 5,000 cube to be taken off the site, which we will if we're doing roads. So we'll need to secure that zoning to future-proof that aggregate supply. So,
thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you for your time today. That was extremely valuable. And we have Councillor Smith who has the last question before we have a
super quick
cup of tea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Guys, just quickly, every time the NTA comes to us now, I'm reminded of the quote, work smarter, not harder. And I mean, the NTA is the future for local government, so thank you for the mahi that you're doing. My question is, this is obviously clearly a significant increase in level of service. Do we have an idea of what that increase in cost might look like? An estimate?
I wouldn't, yeah, I mean, we might see improvement out there, but I wouldn't go selling it as improvement as such. It's more an opportunity to define that level of service as is expected of us through the introduction of ONF and the like. So Andy may have more to say on that. But
yeah, so the change that you saw from the 1821 AMP to the 2124 AMP, there's a significant change in funding request to Waka Kotahi for unsealed road rehabilitation costs, so work category 211. That was all generated out of the work we'd done leading into the AMP with the model. So the cost is already there. What we've done is by looking at those different levels of service, so the level of service 1 through to level of service 3, is reproportion that money where it needs to be spent. So we're trying not to incur more costs, but trying to utilise that money that we have available more efficiently, basically, to get a better outcome on the ground.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And thank you for your presentation. We'll now adjourn to have a coffee, and you both can have a biscuit as well, because we're so impressed from your presentation today. And
thank you.
I think the finalists should be aware of this. We need to do some comms around this because you're making us look so good right now. And if we can roll this out across the finals like you've done in Kaipara, just like Jason has said, we might be riding our bikes on those metal roads.
What time are we resuming?
We can resume at 10 past. Cool. We've got 17 minutes to have a...
Joshua, could you pause the live stream?